Well, we are very fortunate now to welcome to XEP journalist Stephen Totilo, now of GameFile News. Stephen, we're looking forward to picking your brain today about all things Xbox and games journalism. But of course, we must ask, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. One of my kids is sick today, so I had more of a sick day than a normal work day. But when you're running your own business now, you can kind of be more flexible, I guess. Nobody to answer to but myself and the readers. But the readers weren't expecting a newsletter today. We do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and today was Tuesday, the day we're recording, so we're good.
Yeah, I would imagine working from home affords you certain luxuries, but also certain pressures. Do you feel the need to be working at all times because you're at home?
I wouldn't say that being home is what does it. It's just a work ethic, which is sometimes a virtue, probably sometimes a flaw that I've
Mhm.
had from, just to me being a journalist is there's really no off hours as defined by the work that you do, because news can happen at any moment, and
Mhm.
depending on the beat that you cover and the kind of outlet you write for, you might need to put that news out there into the world at any given moment.
Mhm.
Obviously, you need to have boundaries and limits and what have you, but the nature of the job from when it started for me was something where you kind of can't really control what the timing is going to be, and you just try to find the best possible balance. Working from home didn't really change that. Of course,
Mhm.
it does make it more tempting to, or it's I'm more prone to doing work probably when I shouldn't be, because there's no commute to delineate. Okay, you kind of should be ending the day. That sort
Mhm.
type of thing.
That makes good sense. And I think it's important, though, that we clarify for readers or for listeners, rather, I should say, you've held a number of various positions in at a number of outlets in the games
Mm,
media space,
that's true.
from Kotaku to MTV News to
Hmm.
Axios, and now with GameFile.
Right.
Um, can you talk a little bit about the history of your experience? Because you have a 20-year career in games coverage.
That's right. That's right. Right. I at this point have a lot of places I've worked, but I work at each of them for a long time, I think. So it's not like I'm not changing hats that frequently. The first thing I ever wrote about video games professionally was in 1999. I was an
Oh,
intern
nice.
for Newsweek magazine when it was a magazine. I don't even know if it's still a magazine.
Mhm.
And it was a very short blurb about a Nintendo 64 game called Rocket Robot on Wheels, which was made by Sucker Punch, who became much more famous for making the Infamous series and
Mhm.
Ghost of Tsushima, what have you. But this was their first game, which was for the N64. And I was a national affairs intern, meaning I covered a lot, helped out with like the national news. I come out of graduate school. I got a graduate degree in journalism, and but there was a tech section, and they were interested in occasionally doing gaming things, and I was interested in gaming, so I was like, oh well, there's this game I heard about that seemed interesting. So because you're at a big mainstream publication like Newsweek, they'll send you the early cartridge, which the N64 cartridges back in the day, if you got one early, they were extra long, so like double tall, like N64 cartridges.
Mhm.
Um, so I started then, and then I did the kind of games journalism a little bit on and off, but not that much for several years. And in 2004 or so, I got more serious about it. Started writing about games for the New York Times. I've kind of written on and off for them for my whole career. But then it was 4 years at MTV News, 2005 to 2009. Listeners who know who Kurt Loder is might like to know that I sat opposite the wall of Kurt Loder, so his office was next to my cube. Listeners who don't know who Kurt Loder is, you can have skip that fact, I guess. Don't need to remember it. 11 years at Kotaku. I was deputy editor there and then editor in chief for 9 years. And then at Axios, I was doing a gaming newsletter for 2.5 years. And now I've gone independent with GameFile. And through that time, been very fortunate to be able to make a living covering games. I love games. I love journalism. So it's been a nice combination of the two. I've interviewed just about anybody you can think of in the games industry and the culture of games over the last 20 years. So it's been a fun ride, and hopefully there's a lot more left for me to do.
Is there anyone left on your hit list that you want to interview?
Uh, yeah, it cycles because there's people that I never, for whatever reason, have never spoken to, like Strauss Zelnick, the head of Take-Two, for some reason. So I've interviewed the heads of Ubisoft, Nintendo, Sony, Xbox, EA, Activision, Blizzard, whatever, all these companies. But for some reason, never spoke to Strauss. Actually, that's not true. He did come to the office at Kotaku. We were part of Gawker Media, and he was buddies with the owner. So I guess that's not true. I never interviewed him, but I did chat with him very briefly. These days, though, it's just like, new and interesting people are constantly cycling in. Just the other day, Blizzard got a new president, and I'm
Johanna.
to talk to her. Yes, Johanna Ferris, who had been running the Call of Duty business for Activision. And that's I've never spoken to her before, and I'm sure she'd be interesting to talk to. So there's always new people to chat with. But I've been fortunate. Like, you look at companies like Nintendo that are very closed off, and I was fortunate enough to have a lot of access to them over the years. Interviewed Satoru Iwata, the beloved and late CEO of Nintendo 3 times for 3 different outlets. And had really interesting conversations with him. Shigeru Miyamoto, Shinya Takahashi, the sort of lead devs at Nintendo. Which were pretty good conversations to have over the time. So yeah, it's been nice. I mean, I basically it's an honor and a privilege to be able to cover games, and I always think of myself as working for the readers. They're the ones who ultimately keep the lights on. Used to be more indirect, right? Their interest would, I guess, facilitate advertising around my stories. Now they literally do, because my game file is reader funded, so people are finally directly paying me for my work. And so I'm always trying to, do everything I can to bring interesting, news and commentary and what have you to readers, and getting to, talk to people who otherwise aren't really talking much to the press, or may not be answering the questions that I would like to ask them, that I know the readers would like to hear answers to as well. Is a fun opportunity, and I think it's been a satisfying career to pursue.
Mm-hmm. I've watched a lot of games journalism change since that direct access that you talked about has become more and more readily available, I guess, for all internet users. It started, in my mind, with Twitter. We were able to tweet at journalists, at athletes, at politicians. And I've seen that connection strengthen over the years. And then seemingly now that I feel like there's a rift at times between journalism, or journalists, I should say, critics, content creators, and the audiences they serve. And then with the developers themselves, because in many ways, gamers, viewers, readers all have access to the developers of content themselves. I'm curious if that direct access has changed the way you felt the need to report over time.
Well, I think there was, I certainly was aware of there being, anxiety when companies started doing like company blogs and putting their own press releases out on their own sites. I sense that there were some people in my field who were like, oh, what do we do now? And my sense was, well, if you can be replaced by a corporate blog, then you should rethink the kind of journalism that you were doing. The access and the proximity to these voices that has increased, as you note, over the years, has only made it more and more incumbent on journalists to do the work of journalism and to find things out more often than not, or not, maybe not more often than not, but more importantly than ever, finding things out that people otherwise weren't going to tell you and maybe didn't want you to know. So that can veer towards, of course, having to cover, scandal and misconduct, what have you, things like that. These companies aren't, going to race to talk about, but it can also just be about synthesizing conversations, noticing a trend that's interesting that maybe it's happening at 3 different development studios or 3 different companies, and noticing it and then saying, okay, I'm going to talk to people from each of these. So to use a pretty benign example of that, last year for Axios, I noticed that I did a piece about accessibility around phobias. So there are lots of accessibility options being added by a lot of AAA game studios, primarily, some indies as well, regarding sightedness and hearing and sort of physical dexterity, and that's all noble and important and super valuable. What I found really interesting is that accessibility has gone to the point where developers are also considering other things that might alienate a player from being able to play a game. In this case, whether or not, say, depictions of spiders is going to trigger arachnophobia, or whether being underwater in a sequence of a game is going to trigger thalassophobia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And so you had designers at Sony on Horizon Forbidden West having a thalassophobia mode. You had the folks that made Grounded a couple of years ago, or a few years ago, at Obsidian, had an arachnophobia mode that had gotten some press. The EA folks at Star Wars, making Star Wars Jedi Survivor over at Respawn, also had an arachnophobia mode. So, okay, there's a bunch of different individual instances of this. Let me talk to all of them, and I did. And what are they doing that's in common? What's kind of different? One of the things that struck me is that they're kind of all winging it. So there's not really the same science that they're researching. I don't know how much of that is even out there for them to access to figure out what the extent to which gaming content can indeed, can genuinely trigger such phobias. But they're alert to it. And in one case, the EA devs, they just noticed a colleague not able to work on parts of the game because the content was triggering their phobia, a particular monster. And so they thought, okay, well, let's just kind of dial it back bit by bit and then see if they're more comfortable with it. So very informal, but an interesting frontier in the overall movement for, sort of making games more accessible. So it's things like that interest me as well. And I should also mention, journalism, of course, isn't just speaking to powerful people. In fact, powerful people have the biggest platforms and the most opportunity to express their voice anyway. So part of what's incumbent on journalists, myself included, is to speak to those who don't have voice. So it's the people who are, whether that's an indie developer versus a AAA developer, whether it is a gamer, whether it is a person who is just kind of, working in the salt mines of a big AAA studio and are being mistreated or have a different opinion on how things are going or been laid off. And, certainly pertinent to discussing, the games industry these days. So part of what I see is the importance of my role is to also make sure that I'm not just going for the voices that are easy to get to or the voices that have people paid to put them in front of me. The 1900 laid off workers at Xbox last week largely didn't have, a PR apparatus ready to, sort of communicate their perspective, and their perspective is important. So reporting that out is a key thing to do. I would say that one other thing to go back to the core part of your question, Luke, is that you talked about use the word rift. Mm-hmm. There are different jobs are different, right? So being a reporter is already different than being a critic. And a lot of times in games journalism, reporting and criticism are conflated, and often they're held by the same person. And that's a weird aspect of games journalism. And I would largely attribute it to the fact that, well, some people I think don't recognize the difference, but also because games are so time consuming to play that if you're already, and this was my judgment at Kotaku, if I was going to put a person on a 30-hour, 40-hour game to write a review of, and then there was reporting to do about something somebody discovered in the game or some issue that came up around the game studio vis-a-vis with the work they did on the game, the person who was in the best position to understand that situation and that story was the person who just spent 30 hours on the game, which was the reviewer. So the same people that I would need to do criticism of a game were often the people that were in the best position to do effective reporting about that game. But reporting is different. Like, one level of it is we've seen all this controversy about access to Suicide Squad reviews. The reporters don't need the game in theory, right, to do their reporting. Mm-hmm. The critics do. And yet we know that if you're then going to try to report out what happened with Rocksteady that led to this game, you want somebody to have played the game. So there's always that temptation to blur the lines. Content creators, to me, are presented or are treated by the industry the way that the press used to be, which is that I think the industry 10, 15, 20 years ago saw the gaming press as basically easy marks for, okay, you're going to be so grateful to get access to us that we don't have to worry about you being super critical, or if we are worried that you're going to be critical, we can kind of come after you by threatening to withhold access. And so content creators, I think, are at least assumed by a lot of people in the industry to be more controllable, whether that's the case or not. And I think the press has more so been written off as, we can't deal with these people. Maybe we don't get the same payoff because getting an article written up in this outlet isn't as valuable to us as getting featured in this person's YouTube channel. So I see the press as being held a little bit more at arm's length than they used to by the industry. The content creators embraced more. And so that, to me, is where you wind up having these different groups of people situated differently vis-a-vis both each other and the field that they're covering, if that makes sense.
It does. I have questions to follow up on, but Logan, I think you did as well.
Yeah, a lot of stuff I want to touch on with that. Kind of quickly to address that concept of influencers being approached for content creation around a game's launch. Recently, I was listening to Player One podcast with Chris Johnston, and he had mentioned that influencers he views as kind of actors doing a press tour for a film, where they're there to kind of speak about the game and show it off and kind of promote it in that sense. Whereas I think with what we're talking about here, journalism addressing things that can't be talked about from bigger pieces of a company. And I'm curious if you fall in line with that kind of mentality that Chris was talking about, if that's something that you kind of resonate with, or do you think that it's an analogy that doesn't quite hold water?
Well, in that analogy, you're saying the influencers would be the actors. The actors are officially part of the movie. The influencers aren't inherently so, right? So obviously they can disclose that in this case they are paid by the company to stream the game and promote the game and what have you. But influencers are sometimes doing that, and then sometimes they're not. And the best ones are very clear about when it is that they're doing something where they've been paid to stream Apex Legends or whatever, whatever else. And then when they're not doing so. So I think that's its own kind of unique situation where you want there to be media literacy amongst their followers and viewers to understand, okay, this is one where the opinion might be a bit, by definition, because they're being paid, they may be more inclined to be positive, or they may not even be allowed to say something negative, as the case may be. So I think reporters don't have to only report on scandal. It's just that the reporters are not in the industry, right? That's a thing I emphasize at times, because I sometimes hear reporters, younger ones newer to the field, will say, well, our industry, whatever, we had a rough year last year, our industry. And it's like, well, are you talking about journalism or are you talking about gaming? Because those are separate businesses, separate fields. We as reporters are no more in the gaming industry than reporters covering the White House are part of the presidential administration. And if you find that you feel like reporters who cover politics are a little too cozy with politicians, well, then there you go. Then you definitely are aware of what your ideal would be, which is that there should be a divide. There should be a delineation between the people that are being covered and the people who are doing the coverage. And it's healthy to be watchful of that and recognize which outlets, which reporters are better about maintaining that sense of separation or professional distance in order to do stories. And so you don't only have to be muckraking and looking for the negative or looking for the unknown, but you should certainly be thinking about what is it that I'm putting my effort into, and what is it doing for the reader, right? So you focus on the reader, you focus on, or if you're doing, video news or whatever, the viewer, but you focus on the audience and what you feel like is helpful for them to know that they might not otherwise know. And then how can you do your job to tell them those things that they otherwise weren't going to find out, or that maybe would be better for them to find out now than later? Because that's sometimes the nature of news, is moving ahead. We of course go into the whole world of when is it genuine, worthwhile news to report on a game that's about to be announced anyway, or that kind of thing. But in general, it's, you think of the reader, what it would be helpful for them to know, where is that service that you can provide. And in some cases, those things that you were reporting are things that otherwise were never going to be known. And so if you're doing your job, you are adding to an understanding about gaming overall. That's the beat you're covering, which of course is very different than the job of the influencer or even the job of the critic, which are both valuable and helpful jobs for people, but different.
Yeah.
You touch on several aspects that I find very fascinating, both next to recent reporting of things like Suicide Squad to, I think, just watching social media audiences respond to different types of coverage. That coziness that you mentioned, I think, has caused rebellion in some social spaces versus not. And I wonder, I had a good conversation with a critic at IGN a couple days ago about Suicide Squad, and I asked how is his Travis, how he separates some of the coverage, the frustration, review codes, etc. Right. And he very much feels like he himself is a critic. There are reporters, there are content creators. That might be that's my words. I'm sorry. He specified that there are critics, there are news reporters, and then I feel like there are these nebulous states that some of them exist in where they can dabble in both, or they're on a podcast, or they have a voice on their socials. And those bigger entities can struggle with discerning the journalism from the critique from everything else. And like, I think about Reb Valentine, Stephen Totilo, Jason Schreier. I think of journalism. I don't necessarily always think that with every other name. Right.
Well, I mean, it's different. The topic of separating frustrations from coverage, right? It's like, we're not supposed to be friends with the people we cover, and so we shouldn't be surprised if they do things that we don't like, right? So that's kind of a baseline thing, and these are things that all reporters know. In some cases, it's reporters know these things, but maybe they haven't verbalized them to themselves, or they don't have a person to kind of chat this through. In other cases,
do you think they know that? I'm genuinely curious because I see more people trying to report without having gone to journalism school or learning the ethics.
You don't have to go to journalism school. There's Gamergate drama a decade ago, God help us, it was so long ago, where, there was like, why are you not posting a code of ethics to Kotaku? And they saw that as the biggest scandal, and I wasn't doing that. And my feeling was, well, in that case, I knew that it was in bad faith, and the attempt was, well, they wanted me to post a code of ethics so they can then say, wow, look at all these ways you violated it, and find some small technicality. But like, I ran a very ethical ship, in part because I had very clear sense of the independence of what journalists should be. I also recognize that every single situation you deal with as a reporter is different, and there are nuances to them all, and there are there's no guidebook or playbook that prepares you for all of the complexities as they occur. For example, I didn't expect when Bethesda blacklisted us back in the day that it was going to be for 10 years and carry with me to another outlet. Actually, by the way, I think Bethesda and I are cool now. I've talked to them since I joined GameFile, so I think we're past that, which is nice. But it was about 10 years.
Followed you?
Oh yeah.
I had no idea.
The Bethesda blacklist went from Kotaku, inclusive of Stephen Totilo and Jason Schreier, to then stayed with Kotaku, but then went with me to Axios and went with Jason to Bloomberg. And again, I think it has not, because I've talked to them and they've given me comment on things, so they've acknowledged I exist, which is great. And there's some change of people there, so maybe that has had something to do with it, but it's not followed me to GameFile. So you're not prepared for 10 years of, anytime I have a story I'm going to report, I'm not even getting an acknowledgement in any way that okay, I'm not getting review code, fine, I was prepared for that, but wait, they have a scandal, or there's something where it'd be helpful for them to talk to the press, so maybe there's something where they can clear something up, and they won't talk, right? And that becomes like an extra challenge, especially in terms of the length that went, because my feeling would be, after a while, like, can we just like sit down and talk this through? We've clearly have a difference of opinion on how we handled certain stories, but like, it's 5 years later, and your lawyers refer to us all the time when they're citing our articles to defend you guys as a company against whoever you're suing or being sued by. So if your legal department is cool with our existence, can you all not be cool with our existence? But it can be things like that. It can be there's this instance. Tell me what you guys would do. Okay, so this is like 8 years ago or so, and Baseline Establishment is my name, right? Stephen Totilo. We've established that that's my name. We have no disputing of that. We understand this is a key fact for everybody to think about in this example. So it's a few days before the Game Awards, which might have been called the Video Game Awards, the Spike VGAs. It might have been back in the day. I can't recall what it was. And but it was the Jeff Keighley operation. And I am sent, this is probably more than 10 years ago, because he's been doing it for 10 years. And I am accidentally CC'd on an email that was meant to be sent to Stephen T something else at a game company, talking about the game they were about to reveal at this Jeff Keighley extravaganza. And I'm the only person not from this company in the CC field. So they clearly, this is a person who'd emailed me before, and they just were typing quickly, and they accidentally did that. So suddenly I have a scoop. I have a scoop. I'm at Kotaku at the time. So yeah, this is definitely a bit ago. And I'm like, do I report this? Because the normal Kotaku protocol would be, if we know it, we're going to put it out there. Radical transparency was the ethos of the company that I worked at. And as we approach it, if this is newsworthy, we publish it. Occasionally, we would sit on something because we felt we're just getting ahead of marketing and there's not really any other virtue to telling the readers. So maybe that's not really that worth our doing. And this was very much in that realm. But aside from that, I was like, what are the ethics of reporting something that because you were accidentally CC'd?
Yeah.
Is that fair or not?
That's if it were me, I probably would hold on to the information and address the person that had originally sent it and just said, hey, this came out to me. I don't think it was an intentional thing, but how much of this information, like I guess it depends on the rapport that you have with that person as well, too. If you have a close rapport, then it's kind of one of those things you'd want to breach with them to kind of be like, hey, this is what's going to happen. This is really good information. If this was any other person, I might run with this story, but I'm not trying to, because then it starts falling into that territory of like, okay, well, are you trying to blackmail me now? Like what's going on with the intent here?
And I said the reader comes first. Now, obviously you protect your sources, but this wasn't a source, right? This wasn't somebody who who I was, trusted with some information because they wanted me to know, and it wasn't somebody. It was, what do you do when you, by virtue of the fact that your name is spelled similarly to somebody else, find out a piece of information? And so, I thought about the situation. Ultimately, I chose not to report on it because it took me 24 hours to kind of think it through. And I felt weird about the fact that I knew this thing based on a person making a mistake, right? But I've also had other stories and other scoops and stuff that was relevant and stuff that I have published and that reporters at Kotaku of mine had published, that how we found out about it wasn't always the most noble reason. Person gets laid off and they're pissed off, right? They send you something because they're like, fuck this company. I'm gonna send this out, and I'm gonna get this out there because I want somebody to, I want them to feel pain. And you get this information and you're like, well, I'm not here to facilitate your vengeance, but this is newsworthy information that I want people to know. So the reasons that you're getting the information, you want to know them, but they're not always the reasons that they're not always the most noble reasons, right? Sometimes something accidentally happens. Somebody leaves something on top of a trash can, which is the reason I got one story one time, because I was just like, what's this thing on top of a trash can at E3? Oh, it's a binder with interesting information in it. Okay, well, sorry that person didn't know how to throw their thing out, but I have this information now. So in this case, it was like, well, I know by accident. That's not such a noble thing because they mistyped it. But on the other hand, am I really under any obligation? So I talked to some friends of mine who, I'd been in journalism school with or covered, topics other than games. And we looked for precedent. We found things like a police chief accidentally sending something to the crime reporter. Of course, we're talking about, cops and crime data and stuff like that. Well, it's much more likely that that's going to be newsworthy and you're not going to protect the authorities' mistake, right? In this case, it's like a PR person at a gaming company. There was the factoring in of, does this person get fired if I report this, and do they not if I don't report it? And how would I feel about that, right? Is it worth it? So ultimately, to kind of wind this long story down, is I thought about, if my reader knew how I got this information, because sometimes, you get something and you're not necessarily going to disclose how you got it. But if my reader knew, would I be embarrassed? Would I be ashamed? Would I feel like I hadn't, like that this would feel wrong in some way? And in this case, I was like, yes, this would feel wrong. Like my gut was like, this would feel wrong to say, well, we got this thing just telling you about a game a few days before it was announced because we were accidentally emailed on it. So I chose to not publish. But like, there's no playbook that prepares you for these things. It was the very long way I got back to that point.
That's crazy, because it feels a lot like recently we've had both like self-inflicted wounds that Luke likes to mention with the court case with Xbox and having all of their kind of information just submitted to the court redacted. And then we've had other situations where information is maliciously obtained through hacks, and it's like
Insomniac.
Where do you find that kind of moral grounding to decide, like, where should I be when reporting this kind of thing? That's been a big topic between a lot of outlets who, I would say, less of the journalistic side, more of the critical side when it comes to content coverage in this sense. And it's a very very nebulous thing at the moment. But
anything you accidentally submit to court is fair game. Like especially if you're a $3 trillion company, like, you should have used a darker Sharpie, or you should have not attached things to your PDF. Insomniac that was malicious. That was a crime. That was, putting out personal information. But yet, even still, within that, and a reporter I greatly admire, Ethan Gatch over at Kotaku, who's fearless, he looked through it and he found discussions by Sony, people in Insomniac, and talking about possible layoffs coming to the studio, and the efforts that management was making to avert those layoffs. And that, like, however the information was received, once he found that, of course, that's something that he should be reporting on, and giving Sony every opportunity to talk about it and contextualize and what have you. But that's something where it serves the reader, it serves possibly people in Insomniac, I think, to know that. So the salacious details of how many X-Men games are planned or something like that, or Spider-Man games or whatever it was, use your judgment on whether to cover that, I guess. But something where it's the professional futures of people, it's the decisions people in power are making over people who have less power. Those are the kinds of stories that more often than not are, of course, you should publish.
I appreciate the comment about giving Sony the opportunity to address this as well too. I don't think that really comes up too often nowadays, where if a journalist finds something and they want to run with that story, reaching out to the actual company or the PR team to say like, hey, do you want to make a statement about this? Because I'm going to be making this go live soon. I don't think we really hear that too often.
It's the most elementary thing in journalism, which is to give people a chance to share their point of view, conventionally thought of as requesting comment. You should certainly, when you're whatever journalism you're reading, you should be looking for those lines in the articles that are saying, we asked for comment. If you're not seeing that, sometimes reporters will leave that out just because it's taking up space, but they've done so. But oftentimes it can also be a tell that they didn't bother to. I certainly discover that when I reach out for comment regarding stories that are sometimes 24 hours old, and I'm told, by a representative from the company or the studio or whatever, you're the first person to reach out to me. It'll happen when people's tweets go viral, and then they become a story in and of themselves. It'll happen when regular people are just talking about something and they get swept up into a story, and you say, okay, well, did anybody contact you? Am I really the first reporter? And too often that's the case, but not always. And I think in general, the quality of kind of hard news reporting around games has gotten better. You guys cited Rebecca Valentine and Jason Schreier before. I mentioned Ethan Gatch. There's Nicole Carpenter over at Polygon. There's Nathan Grayson over at Aftermath. There are quite a few reporters I see, doing serious work and doing it with a craft and a carefulness that I think merits. It rewards the audience. So yeah, you should always be asking, because you never know. And my basic thing is, if there's people I'm covering, they should never be surprised by the story I run. Mm-hmm. I err on the side of over explaining what my piece is going to be. It's verboten to actually share a copy with people in advance. Some people will ask for that, and I'm like, no, absolutely not. We just don't do that. But you shouldn't be caught by surprise, because if I tell you what I'm including in the story and I'm not giving you control of the copy, I'm not letting you edit it, then what's the worst that's going to happen to me? You're going to dispute it in some way that gives me more material that I can use, because maybe you're going to give me another comment or something like that, which I'll choose whether or not to put all of it or some of it in the piece. I don't want your voice to overwhelm my story just because you're disputing what I'm reporting. But you also, so I may get extra information. Also, like, what am I afraid of? Like, the story's going to be public soon anyway. You're going to read it anyway. So if it's that, I'm worried they're going to get mad. Well, they're going to get mad in an hour when it goes live, or they're going to get mad in 24 hours when it goes live. So you should have no hesitation. If you, in fact, as a reporter, feel uncomfortable about going to somebody and saying, this is the story I'm writing about you, that might be a sign that what you're writing is something you shouldn't be writing. Because if you're not comfortable for it, of course, you can be writing and reporting things that are uncomfortable that is going to piss somebody else off. And you're just not that kind of person who is going to be, savoring that conflict or that animosity. But I always, at Kotaku, always encourage my reporters, follow up, ask questions. Even when somebody has already said something, hey, why do I need to get them to make a statement? They already tweeted a thing. They already said a thing. Well, ask them anyway, because you never know what they're going to tell you. That may then become a scoop, may become an original thing. So it's ask, pick up the phone, send an email, whatever it is. Try to find out more information, and you never know. And then they can never say, well, you didn't ask us, or here's a thing you should have known. Well, it's like, well, I gave you a chance and you didn't tell me.
Yeah, definitely.
In your tenure asking these questions to so many people in the games industry, you've obviously bumped elbows, rubbed elbows, and had conversations with people on and off the record at high and low ranking elements. And I'm curious if in doing so, you've learned, or rather I should say, seen companies learn how to better navigate the waters of game development, or if, because that wasn't maybe what your role at the time, seeing how they navigate PR in a better way, or even working with journalists like yourself.
I don't know how it is in other fields, because it's the field I've covered the most, but I have a stinking feeling that people who do comms and gaming, many of them don't really understand the full range of options at their disposal. I'm often shocked at the refusal of some game companies reps to even talk on background or off the record to help shape a story. And I know in other fields that happens to a fault, to the point where you have kind of invisible hands on a story, shaping, pulling the strings of making sure the reporter didn't say this, that, or the other. And I am disappointed the extent to which I will have a story that is potentially volatile in some way. And I'm like, look, I know you don't want to comment on this, but like, let's get on the phone and talk off the record about it. And let me get, tell me more of the perspective so I can understand. So at least I don't write the wrong thing, or I don't write a thing where I'm just kind of walking into thinking about this the wrong way or something like that. And I found that to this day, you'll have entire companies, comms teams where it seems like they don't seem to understand that that's an option. And then others who I can generally consider to be more sophisticated understand the range of ways to communicate with a reporter to decide, well, we want to be in the story, or we don't want to be in the story, but we want to be, we want to be able to influence the story in some way. Mm-hmm. Aside from that, I also find that certainly you have, and it's like inconsistent in terms of the ability to get access to developers or to get people to tell stories, but game companies have marketing plans, especially the biggest ones. And for the most part, they only want to talk when they are on the next beat of their marketing plan. There are many interesting and positive stories that I would like to do and have wanted to do in the past where I need that door to be opened. Like, maybe I could go through the side door or the back door to get the story still, but it would be really helpful to just open the front door and help me tell this completely uncontroversial story about your game. And yet, oh no, developers are all busy or they're on vacation because they just shipped a game. Okay, well then let's do it in a month when they're back, because I'm still interested and I know the readers will still be interested, but like they're done because the comms team's plan to promote the game ended on launch day or a week after or something like that, and they're done. And it's like, well, there will be people who would love to read about this thing about your game a month from now, 2 months from now. I'm promising your game will still be worthwhile and worth talking about. And they just don't see it. And I think often it's because, the comms teams and the PR teams are part of the marketing teams in most of these companies, or many of them. And so that is the function. And of course, many of these marketing teams have historically assumed that the journalists are part of their teams as well. So, many a time earlier in my career, back when like sending physical swag was more of a thing to reporters, even if I wasn't interested in it, we would still be sent things that would then say like, thank you for your help in launching this game. And I'm like, I didn't help y'all. Like, I was here to cover it and report on it, but I wasn't here to lend an assist. But that's just sort of a mindset that's, sort of was there. And it's part of what I was saying about kind of a shift towards seeing maybe influencers as fulfilling more of that role and recognizing that maybe, the media is not quite there. Of course, what we haven't even talked about is the frailty of the fragility of the media right now, and the troubles, in my industry that lead somebody like me to doing reader-funded journalism, which is going fine, but going well. But, reporters in general are in a challenged state professionally because outlets are, big and small, in gaming and outside of gaming coverage are facing lots of challenges. So arguably these game companies are dealing with, a weakened adversary when they're dealing with the press, given that the companies by and large are still doing pretty well, even despite some of the layoff in earnings woes they've had.
I regularly run into what you're describing, though. The comms team shuts down after X time.
Yeah.
And it's very frustrating, right? Perhaps, and our positions are different, but as somebody who likes to do developer interviews, and I'm very proud of the 4 years of, or 3 years of XEP and how
you got a who's who of people been on there.
I've tried for that, but it's been funny because to try and get more, or somebody from a recent game at some point, sometimes the comms just shut down. And that has been a wall to run into. Exactly.
You haven't moved on, but they've moved on. The players haven't moved on, but they've moved on. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm curious. We talked, in the lead up to starting this whole conversation, your experience with Xbox, and you've been reporting on them for a long time.
Yeah.
How have they changed their communication in your times covering games, specifically in the most recent years? Because I feel like their business strategy has changed.
I've always found them pretty easy to communicate with. One of the things that benefited them is just they're an American company. I'm an American reporter. I'm dealing with the American comms team. When I have a request, I'm potentially, accessing the people who have the most pull within the company. Contrast that to dealing with Nintendo, to use a counterpart, right? Where I'm dealing with the American division of Nintendo, which is, has far less say and power in terms of what happens at Nintendo. They don't develop games. They don't pick what games are going to be made. They don't choose which developers are talking. They don't have a lot of power in general. Nintendo of America. And So if I'm putting in a request through them, they got to go back to Japan, whatever, and it's a whole thorny thing, language barrier, et cetera, and so forth. So Microsoft, by being the for much of my career, it was Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo. I think Sega was pretty much out of being a platform, around when I was starting. But Microsoft always had that advantage, or I always had that perk with Microsoft, and that, again, I can just sort of, like, I was more proximate to the decision makers who could, okay, a story being done, an interview being done, something like that. So that was helpful. And so I found them to be, they had the capability to communicate as much as they wanted to without having to ask for permission from some home office. And I found them taking advantage of that. It certainly helps to develop professional relationships over time. So Phil Spencer, who I'm sure every listener here knows, running gaming at Microsoft now, was running their game studios long time ago when I was interviewing him, 15 years ago or whatever that was, the first time we chatted. And the fact that he's, risen through that division, and I've been a reporter ready to ask questions, and the fact that Phil and I know who each other are and what have you, and I'm on his Xbox friends list or whatever, I think, and means that he knows me, I know him. I don't like chat casually with him, but there's enough familiarity that can then lead to me getting an interview or getting an answer on something through him. And over time, I've met other people with, at all levels of Xbox. And so that has always been kind of useful. In terms of them talking about what they do, they've had, many different messages over the time, and those messages have often been quite bold. I would say that Sony's messaging around what it does has been very consistent since they got into gaming in the first place. Nintendo has obviously made many sharp turns, going from GameCube to DS and Wii, or going from Wii U to Switch. Whereas Microsoft, I can remember being at the infamous Xbox One reveal event, at Microsoft's campus, and I'm the one who was sitting in the room interviewing Phil Harrison, and he told me that everybody's games would need to connect to the internet once every 24 hours. And I was immediately, texting that back to the home office at Kotaku. I'm like, I can't believe what he just told me. And I'm being like escorted to the next interview I have, because it's like scheduled interviews. And I think it wasn't while walking from the Phil interview to the Phil Harrison interview to the next, but I think probably the walk from the one following Phil Harrison to the one after that, where I was intercepted by an Xbox comms person. Are you going to report that? Are you going to write that? And I'm like, I already sent it back to the office, to Kotaku. We're covering that. And they, I think they knew as soon as he said that was going to be a problem for them. They were trying something that maybe they were too honest about the extent to which they wanted their users tethered to the internet. And they were certainly, I think, foolhardy in trying to frame entertainment other than gaming as such a central thing to the console experience, particularly for the kind of people who are going to be interested in a console when it's first announced. Those aren't the people that are going to get excited because they can watch football games and have a football app snapped to the side, of their display via Xbox One. Well, the snap was an interesting concept. So like I was there for that, where on the one hand, they had a whole big, like, come to our campus and look at all of these, we have all these tents set up. Was it on their campus? It was somewhere in the area. But we have, we're giving you access to all of these executives and all that kind of stuff, which was like very like open and, to an extent transparent. And that was the good aspect of it. The bad aspect of it, at least for them, it was fascinating for readers, was just the ridiculousness of some of the things that they were saying that they were doing. And then they got conservative about, I think, talking about what they were doing. I think they were uncertain for a while. I find anybody who's in third place in a three-way console war, though, tends to do the more interesting things. And so I find, as a reporter, ask the people who are losing or struggling or therefore innovating for the interviews, as opposed to the people who are in the lead, because the people in the lead are like, we don't need to talk to you. Like, we're kicking ass already. Why would we stop and chat with you? But the people who are struggling or trying to claw in and get some more market share or whatever, those are the people who are more likely to want to talk to you. And so, that's evolved. And Phil Spencer's personality is very, one of being very personable and friendly. And I think it's been challenged by some of the news and some of the ways I think people think about the Xbox division vis-a-vis the buying conglomerate aspect of Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard King. But he's somebody who has, I think, exhibited some unexpectedly positive values vis-a-vis promoting diversity within his teams, vis-a-vis verbally supporting ideas of game preservation, which he talked to me a lot about in an interview I did with him a couple of years ago, where he said basically there should be an industry-wide standard that permits emulators of a certain kind. And there should be kind of a collective agreement by companies to allow certain things like that, to allow for games to be preserved in memoriam, which is timely as of, every day, including the day we're speaking, where Spec Ops: The Line is in the process of being removed from digital stores.
Saw that.
As we speak. So I find they've always been communicative, not always had the best messages to share, at least for their benefit, but always fascinating messages to share for my benefit, because whether they're great plans or ridiculous plans, they make for interesting copy. And I certainly, I think we all know what's coming around the corner, and I reported on it. One of my first stories for GameFile was Microsoft bringing more of its games to more platforms. So I reported Sea of Thieves coming to PlayStation, which I'd heard about last year, and hasn't been officially announced yet, but have good reason to believe it's coming. And
so you're still confident in that after that story has come?
Yeah. I have a general sense of when we'll be playing it, but yeah, and I wouldn't have published it if I wasn't confident. And there's always some nervousness because you're putting yourself out there and you don't have the confirmation to point to and say, see, prove it. But yeah. But
can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you run into information like that, where like the idea that Rare might bring Sea of Thieves to PlayStation, when you run into that type of moment, you have the decision to obviously state the information that you've heard, but also to your point, you have a good sense of when that might be happening. You have to make a selection of what to share and what not to, likely based on, I guess, the validity of the source or how much they can tell you in that moment. How do you gauge what to say and what not to say in an instance like that?
Well, I heard about it in October or November of last year, and I published something in January. So that probably, should tell you something about how ready I was to report something. And it wasn't just because I was leaving Axios and, was busy with other things, although that honestly was a factor. Like, I needed to figure out how I was getting to the next stage of my career. And so some stories that I wanted to dig into, I wasn't able to put as much energy into because I'm building a Substack, platformed newsletter with GameFile. And I, was figuring out what my next phase would be, and had an interview with the head of gaming at Netflix to do, and a head of an interview with the CEO of Nexon to do, and all sorts of other things. So some of it is just like juggling stories. So some of that, it's that like there are stories that I will not get to this week because my kid was sick. And of course my kid being sick is far more important than any stories I report, but like real life happens. Right. And so, and that can impact where you are in a story and what you're able to report. And, but basically you don't want to publish anything with just one source. That would be ridiculous because there's very few instances where one source is good enough. Sources can be people or documents or I guess other things, but bear that in mind. So when somebody is saying, according to sources according to two sources or whatever it might be, like those can be a person told me this, and then a document that I saw that I believe, to be real, or the two sources, right? It can be a variety of things. It can be people who are telling you something on the record because you can name them, and then that adds credibility to what they're saying because they're putting themselves out on the line versus if they're not willing to put themselves out there. And there are very understandable reasons why they may not. But then you're like, well, if you're not feeling the pressure of this better be right. And generally it's not people wanting to be off the record because they're lying to you, but they're off the record. And so they have the convenience of not having to worry that it might not fully be accurate. Well, you don't have that convenience if you're the reporter. So they may have misheard a part of it. So they may have told you, they may have heard that Sea of Thieves was coming to another platform, and they think I said PlayStation, but they're not, they'll tell me PlayStation because that's what they think they heard. But maybe they actually heard Switch. Maybe they actually heard Atari 7800, to be ridiculous. And like, they may not be sweating it because they're never thinking at any moment, oh my God, my name is going to be out there saying this potentially wrong thing. But you, as the reporter, are. So you want to be like, how sure are you PlayStation? Why are you sure it's PlayStation and not this other thing? Jeff Grubb, who reported this about an hour before I ran my GameFile story, and my GameFile story indicates that I'd asked for comment the weekend before, so I was not just picking up on what Grubb had reported, but he I believe he's reported Switch and PS5, I think, right? Or Switch and PlayStation, and I had only heard PlayStation. So, we'll see. Like, maybe it's both, but like the channels through which I had discussed this with people, it led me to feel good about PlayStation, not feel good about other things, feel good about it being Sea of Thieves. I've heard about other games. I've heard about games from individual sources, but because they're only individual sources, I wouldn't even, I wouldn't even have it as a takeaway from this conversation. Oh, it's going to be more than one game. Like, there may be reason to think it's more than one game. We've certainly seen rumors about Hi-Fi Rush as an example, but that's not something I heard about directly. So, like, I have not reported that Hi-Fi Rush would be coming to other platforms. I'm assuming that if Sea of Thieves is coming to PlayStation, then that represents a pretty significant crossing of a line for Microsoft that would seem to be consistent with thinking about their business more broadly. In fact, it's both crossing a line, but also consistent, right? They've talked about having their games on more screens and reaching more people. When I talked to Phil Spencer 2 years ago, he told me that he wanted Starfield to be Todd Howard's most widely played game. I say, how do you do that if you keep it exclusive? Well, it's because we're putting it on more screens. Well, another way you do it is you don't keep it exclusive. In that case, I don't have any reason to think Starfield isn't remaining on Xbox and PC only, but who knows? But if you do have a game like Sea of Thieves, which has saturated the Xbox player base and the PC player base and has sold as many copies as it's probably going to sell, and then you say, well, where are we going to get more players? PlayStation would seem to be a place you're going to get more players. So it's both a natural part of what you do, I think, if you're a Microsoft trying to maximize player base, but it also does feel like you're putting a game out on the same platform whose bosses were claiming last year you shouldn't be allowed to buy Activision Blizzard King because they said they can't trust you to still put Call of Duty on other platforms, right? So it's like you're doing something that your own competition claimed that you weren't going to do, and yet they had to have known, which is kind of interesting, right? If this is all the case. So yes, I still believe it's going to happen. Maybe it'll be announced by the time people listen to this. We'll find out. Maybe it won't be announced for another month or two. We'll find
This
out.
is going up an hour or so after. It's going to take me
You never
render
know.
and download.
You never know. I mean, Sony State of Play is tomorrow. So, like, if you run into a hitch, if life gets in the way for you, and you fall on the Covenant sword behind you for some reason, you get an injury, you might be delayed a day, and this might be announced on State. I don't know if it'll be announced at Sony State of Play, but yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. How are you guys upset about Sea of Thieves coming to other platforms?
Okay. So first of all, he's Captain Logan. His thing is Sea of Thieves.
This is the Reaper's Mark from Sea of Thieves.
Right. So more people playing. You like this?
I would.
Right?
Yeah, I would love it.
I would be fine. First off, to kind of lay out my stance. In bias aside, I am in the game because of the content that I've made for them. So I have a heavy bias towards the studio.
Right.
Already.
So you must know then. They must have already consulted with you about going to PlayStation.
No, they haven't. That's the weird thing is I talk to the devs on a regular basis, and I haven't gotten the devs that I've talked to don't know a thing about this. So, and that's the thing is the concern that I have is not so much if Sea of Thieves actually goes to Sony or to Switch. That was a thing that I've wanted since 2019.
Right.
The concerns that I have always been around the studio that is currently working. They have, I think, 4 studios total that are contracted, but also the main studio that are working towards building content for that game. On top of Everwild, I don't know if they have the bandwidth to try to port that to other systems and maintain support for those, or if that is something that is going to get subcontracted out to another studio and what the legalities behind that are. So that was my only ever concern with that. But I will be very interested to see if that actually happens, because it's a huge break from the branding of Xbox and stuff.
I have a thought, but I would like to hear your response to him first, because I have a question. But go ahead.
Oh, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting the developers you're speaking to don't know about it. That's very intriguing to hear that. So we'll find out. I guess whether or not. How do you prove a negative though, right? What if this doesn't get announced for a year? Then I guess I'll have looked like a fool. But we'll see. I don't think it'll be that long. But we'll see.
Oh, juicy and fun and exciting. I have enjoyed as somebody who I've gone where I feel my dollar is most valued through the course of my gaming history. I was PlayStation, then I went to Xbox 360, and then ended up on PS4. And I tend to main Xbox now. My beat, if a content creator can have that, is Xbox. Yes. I enjoy games in many places, but as somebody who absolutely adores and loves Halo and Gears, the idea of more people playing it is good for me. And then I wonder, what is the health of the brand if you no longer have to have the Xbox? And then I step in to look at the more modern elements, and Stephen, maybe I'm off base, but the idea that I don't actually care as long as I have my controller and my achievements, do I really care if there is a box? And I really wonder, I think you would have a more nuanced perspective just by way of reporting, but also the time invested in the industry. Do I care? Like, should I care as a consumer? That's not my problem. I just want to play games, and I want people to play what I like because I want more of it.
I mean, I think you want more than one company in the world to make toasters, but I don't know that you ultimately should want there to be a certain toaster required for the bread you like, right?
Yeah. There you go. That's an oddly appropriate analogy.
I mean, we understand that, like, what's happening in gaming, there's more innovations in gaming than in toast, right? To extend the metaphor, and people are trying to figure out new ways, if toast can make you cry, or if you can get live service toast, what have you. But there's other gaming, to be slightly more serious. Gaming is a constantly evolving medium and art form. And so it is, and one of the reasons I love covering it is that it is the sands on which the developers and the creators stand is constantly shifting. There's no solid ground the way there is, I'd say, in writing a novel or in even movie making, where the technology has changed a bit over time, but not to the extent to which technology and the platform is constantly changing in gaming. People are kind of refiguring out how to visually represent the things that they're creating, right, in gaming, whether it's the advent of 3D graphics and polygonal graphics in the 90s, or whether it is the rendering and the processing power that allowed for more open worlds in the 2000s, and putting more and more characters on screen in the decade hence, but also having more internet connected worlds and experiences, and the innovation of games being able to be patched, which obviously a lot of people are very grumpy about because they feel it's allowed games to ship in rougher states. But the ability for games to evolve over time and be reactive to what players are experiencing, all of those things require smart people being able to make a living doing this. And so there's an ecosystem that involves first party, right, and owning a platform as a company, and then being able to charge a cut to people who are not native to your platform. I'm talking about third-party developers, and then being able to have a relative cost advantage by not having to pay that 30% or whatever it is when it's a first-party game, right? And you're not having to pay yourself the 30%. There is an economics that can make it very powerful to be a platform holder, and therefore can allow for investment in gaming that is far greater than perhaps what even a third-party publisher or developer can afford to do, which is why Nintendo, for example, has been able to ride, some very low depths in their run, and then being able to finance great innovation and experimentation as they have. It doesn't always hit. I like Labo, but Nintendo Labo wasn't exactly a worldwide phenomenon the way that, Nintendo Wii was, or the way that Wii Fit was, or something like that. Right. But a company that can kind of constantly finance that kind of experimentation is valuable. And perhaps they might argue the best way to do that is to own the platform as well. And so when you think about what Xbox is doing, I think you don't really want to cry that much for a company that just generated $27 billion in the last 3 months of last calendar year, which is the earnings that they put out this just a few hours ago before we spoke, for the last quarter of third quarter, I guess it is, of their fiscal year, but last quarter of calendar year 2023. And by the way, their Xbox or their gaming revenue is up 60%. I think 55% or so, I'm doing this from memory now, was from Activision Blizzard. So everything was growth. And while actually they are not growing as fast as some other divisions of Xbox, which might indicate, or other divisions of Microsoft, which might indicate why they might be feeling pressure to have done more cuts, because internally they're probably looked at as like, well, why are you not growing as fast as these, AI, cloud server people, or LinkedIn or something like that. But so there's some of that going on, but generally I think the question about, is there a problem for the Xbox gamer if Xbox games are on more platforms? The main problem would be if it destroys their business model such that they cannot finance the kind of experimentation and innovation that would be rewarding for Xbox players or gaming players in general to experience. It would be sad and disappointing if Nintendo and Sony, by being still being first parties with their own platforms, are able to finance more creativity and innovation than Xbox, if Xbox has sort of lost the ability to be a platform holder. But I don't think that's what's happening. Like, I think Xbox is just kind of redefining what the platform is. And for them, the platform is not so much the box, it's that service that you're tethered to, which was previously thought of more of Xbox Live. It is now thought of more of as the Game Pass ecosystem, which has its own fraught problems in terms of the cuts that developers get from that, and the kind of games that can thrive or succeed, and the economic model around paying developers for, engagement of their games, and who gets to decide what games get financed and made in a Game Pass model. But ultimately, a platform is essentially the connective tissue that binds a large number of games together and then potentially finances the development of new games. And Microsoft, I think, just doesn't see the physical box as the platform so much as it sees its network of services as the platform. And I don't think that means the box goes away. The box becomes a device to use it on. I've been using the PlayStation Portal, which was laughed at, and for some good reasons, when it was announced. And I'm fortunate enough that Sony sent me one. So A, that means I didn't have to pay for it. And B, that means I could get one, because even people who have money cannot find the PlayStation Portal because it's never in stock. And all it is a convenient way to play PlayStation 5 games in a room other than the room where I have my PlayStation 5. It's a complete luxury item. But what it hints at, like so many things that we've experienced have hinted at in the last several years, I think, is this moment when the games we play are available everywhere. And it's just kind of what everybody's going for in some way. And I think that's kind of what Microsoft is going for as well. It's just, we know we make a game that's interesting. Is it acceptable to not have that game be available to the person who wants to play it? And what barriers make financial sense for Microsoft as a company to erect or to not have for somebody to play? And the old model, of course, always was, well, an appropriate barrier would be a $400 console. And then Microsoft said several years ago, well, no, we would also accept the barrier being a several $1,000 PC, or maybe not even several $1,000 PC, right? So you guys got used to that, right? You're used to the fact that an Xbox game also launches on PC at the same time. And you're comfortable, right? That your heart rate doesn't race when you find out.
It has never bothered me.
It's when they remove the places to play it that I start getting worried.
Right. Well, so I don't see the console going away. I mean, I also don't see them going third party, because there are potentially decent margins in making hardware, and there's still reasons to make it. But I mean, I guess that could happen. I guess their games could only run natively on PlayStations, and they wouldn't have their own box. But I just don't know. I mean,
so that begs the question: given your sources and knowledge for Sea of Thieves to go to another platform, seeing the benefits and drawbacks, I looked at like Activision Blizzard's return, or no, let me rephrase that. The top 20 NPD numbers most recently included 5 Microsoft games. 4 of them were Activision, or 3 of them were Activision. 1 was Minecraft. 1 was Starfield.
Right.
Based on either what you've heard in the industry or your own intuition, do you anticipate more games beyond Sea of Thieves, in this case as our example, going to other platforms, PlayStation or otherwise? From the Xbox catalog, I should be clear.
Like I was saying before, like if it makes sense for Sea of Thieves to do it, then I don't see why it wouldn't make sense to do it. I mean, they did it with the Ori games on Switch. Didn't seem like they were ragingly successful. I think the shocking thing here isn't so much, oh, it's nice and that's cute, you port it to another platform, and maybe it's going to be it's a niche game, it might have some extra success, and it can kind of even understand it. I think the thing that's kind of mind-blowing is the idea of Sea of Thieves, which is much more in the blockbuster realm, right, of games, being on not a tiny platform, but a big, directly competitive platform. And so that's weird to think about, but it's also like many years removed from when it was made. So do I see a day anytime soon where, Halo Infinite 2, Infiniter, is going to be launching on PlayStation and Xbox at the same time? That would surprise me greatly, not even because of anything anybody said to me, but just because that would be very strange, but who knows? Maybe they'll get there at some point. But it does make sense to take a game that was already exhausted its audience on one thing, and then it's what Sony's doing now, right? They don't believe in PC day and date, but they believe in PC helping them recoup costs. So after a PlayStation game is 2 years old or so, they bring it to PC because they figure in their mindset, we needed to be exclusive first to sell as many PS4s or PS5s as possible to help finance this game and to build an ecosystem through our hardware, which is their main way. I think they still want to connect their players. And then, okay, we've done that. We've done that mission. Let's get some more money off this game. So what can we do? Oh, we can go and we can put it on PC. It's almost like, why wouldn't they also put it on the Xbox too? If you think about it that way, is that if they're done, if they've sold enough God of Wars everywhere, but I guess they think the only place you should be able to get God of War if you want a console is PlayStation. But if it's like, I don't know, what's a tier down from that? I mean, how's MLB The Show doing for them now, right? They didn't have a choice in that. Major League Baseball did. They're the publisher of that. You know, they're the rights holder, and they wanted to be on multiple platforms. And then MLB is the publisher of that game on other platforms. It still sells well for PlayStation. Sony's straight up making a game for Microsoft and Nintendo every year now. It's Sony's San Diego studio that's doing it. So weird stuff happens. I don't know. I mean, I guess I use my Xbox probably more than any other console, mostly because that's the one that my kids watch Disney Plus on. There's great innovations in, like, it's sort of ridiculous that, like, today I accidentally closed a game on my PS5 when I opened up another game. Doesn't happen on my Xbox. I don't know why they don't even warn you. Well, Sony doesn't even warn you. They don't say, hey, by the way, you're about to close this game. They just, well, you must not have wanted it. We think you're smart enough to know what you were doing. And I'm like, I'm not that smart. I didn't know what I was doing. Whereas with Xbox, right? Quick resume. It's the greatest thing. And so there's features like that still stand out. I don't know the quick resume itself is worth spending $300, $400, $500, whatever on an Xbox for. But yeah, I think it's more discomforting looking at this, the leaks from the court case to see that they would put it out a Series X with no disk drive. And I wonder, I don't know if that's still their plan. But this idea of kind of leaving certain options for playing behind, one of which being leaving the physical media era behind. Yes, I happily download games and play most of my games through downloads. Own very few discs for any games this generation, very few cartridges for my Switch. But to not give people that option, or to connect it to an external hard drive, to offer that option via an external hard drive, which I guess is a supposition there. That to me almost feels more radical to me than bringing your 5-year-old game to PlayStation.
That's so interesting. I have such a different perspective on that, because I feel like the ecosystem, having the single player or having the first party content being exclusive, is how we have that renewed investment in the ecosystem from a console perspective. That then helps drive the innovations on a competing platform to push each other to do features that do ring well, like adaptive triggers on DualSense coming over to Xbox controllers because it's such a big hit. Right. Things like quick resume coming over to PlayStation because there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to have instances of operating systems to be able to maintain those persisting beyond. It's that's what I love about that kind of concept. But I can see from that perspective how if you did push games out to other ones, you're still receiving revenue, but you're not necessarily, you're decentralizing the focus on consoles, which I think is where we start to see some of those innovations. Just look at like Nintendo's consistent renewal on trying to change the form factor or how they bring experiences for games through their hardware.
Right. I mean, arguably Nintendo doesn't face enough competition, right? They have the kid market, they have the kid market cornered. And so through the eShop is, probably 5 years overdue for an overhaul, and it's just not very user friendly. And yet who is their competition, right? This actually goes to the questions in the Epic's Fortnite lawsuit against Apple. Was this idea that Apple would say, well, we're competing with Google Android, and if people like the way they do their OS and their app store better, they can always switch over. And Microsoft's like, or Epic's like, what are you talking about? People buy the phone, they're just kind of locked into your marketplace. We actually believe you're monopolizing, and there should be competition and there should be multiple app stores on your platform. This is anti-competitive and lacking innovation, whatever. This should be antitrust. And so far, the court's largely, well, pretty much entirely sided with Apple, except for one small aspect of that. So arguably, even when you have 3 competing consoles, you don't have sufficient competition to really motivate innovation in areas that a company doesn't care to innovate in. And so Nintendo cares to innovate in game design. They don't seem to care to innovate that much in, say, the shopping experience or the operating system experience or something like that. And I think they feel no pressure other than what they choose to do. In the case of PlayStation and Xbox, my sense is that there is more direct competition in terms of feature sets of the 2 boxes, because they're seen as more of I choose this one versus that one. I don't know. I'm actually with you in a lot of this. That I don't expect, like, the next Halo to go day and date on PlayStation as well. I think that would be very confusing to me if they did that. So I do think that Microsoft would still use game exclusivity as a distinguishing component of what they have. I mean, certainly they wanted Indiana Jones to be exclusive when it was initially going to be third party, right? And so this came out in the court case last summer with Sony and the FTC and what have you. To that they went to Disney and they said, we want to renegotiate the deal. We want Indiana Jones to be exclusive because, hey, they get PlayStation, they get Spider-Man exclusive over there. We want indie exclusive. And so they clearly are interested in exclusivity, but they're also interested in funding their games. And we are seeing just a variety of different ways, companies saying games are really costly to make. The price of games has not gone up in ages, even though inflation, in terms of inflation, $60 isn't. Of course, wages have changed or not changed over years as well. So maybe that's a fallacious argument. But the cost of making games has definitely gone up. And so where else, you got to make money, I guess, in more ways to pay for these games. And we see companies trying to find alternate means to do so, whether it's, paying $40, $30 extra to get Suicide Squad access 3 days early, hoping the servers don't go down for one full day that you paid for. Mm-hmm. Or it's putting that game out on other platforms after it has run its course on its existing ones, which is a strategy that we're actually seeing Sony and Microsoft both deploy differently. And we'll see the extent to which I'm right and other reporters are right about them pursuing bringing some of their games to other platforms. But nothing I've heard, even though it's single source stuff, to assuage, I guess, some anxiety, has involved day and date launches on Xbox and PlayStation of games or in franchises that were previously Xbox first. So, I mean,
that's interesting. And as we're wrapping down, I do want to to give you a chance to really talk about GameFile, because I find that to be a really cool endeavor. Sure. But you mentioned Nintendo needs more competition. We've talked a lot about Sony and Xbox. Xbox and Nintendo are its own relationship. And I wonder if you see anything in the pipeline, known or unknown to common gamers, that might allow Xbox to either compete with Nintendo or fully step away from that market. I mean, Banjo, I think, is the name that gets tossed by a lot of gamers often. We saw Blade is coming. We know Blade, or we believe Blade to be exclusive based on now clear verbiage. Is there anything that you see that's going to position them to compete in a more readily available way with Nintendo?
Wait, I'm trying to figure out how Blade would be involved in them competing with Nintendo.
Blade is more of a reference to the idea that you talked about exclusivity, Indiana Jones, they've got this, they've got that.
So what might be financing them to do things?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Because I don't know that Blade fits.
I don't think Blade.
Put him in Smash.
I've seen that e-store. I know what's on there.
but Blade and Smash, why not? So, I mean, I loved Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, and I even loved Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts back in the day. I thought that was a fantastic game. I just never played the Game Boy Advance Banjo, but otherwise I've covered all the Banjo games and played them all.
I didn't even know there was one.
Wasn't there? Maybe I'm misremembering, but I thought there was a GBA Banjo game. I could be misremembering.
Goes to Google.
Check out. Let's see if I know what I'm talking about with Banjo. It comes from having the developers who are going to make games that hit the audiences. What Nintendo is really masterful at doing is reaching a very wide age demographic and making a game that a kid might be delighted to play, and that an adult would not feel foolish playing with them. And that's just good game design, and I guess approachable character design, what have you. It's not like I have 2 7-year-olds, and it's not like they just want to play the most childish things possible. It's that they, like any of us, seemed attracted to games that play well and are repulsed by, or repelled, I guess would be a better way of putting it. Repulsed a little strong. They're repelled from games that are not well designed and that are clunky and that have bad controls. And so in some ways there's universal aspects of it, but you got to make something that's somewhat in the milieu of a thing that a kid would be interested in. And aside from the most popular game in the planet or of all time, Microsoft doesn't have any. So aside from that one thing, they have Minecraft. So I think they would argue they're probably already doing pretty well in that sector. But they don't have anything that makes me as a parent be like, okay, I want to let my kids know that gaming on Xbox exists as well. They think gaming only exists on Switch. Don't tell them. Mm-hmm. It's complicated enough. If they knew that the other devices I think they think the Xbox just plays Disney Plus, and I'm not about to emphasize it does anything else. So I don't know what Microsoft might be doing, but I do notice that when I watch a PlayStation developer showcase or the Xbox Direct that happened a couple of weeks back or whatever, I'm like, there's not even an effort made to reach the kind of person that Nintendo Directs seem designed to reach, which is at least in part a group of people that are people like me who are parents of people who play games, who might be interested in games that they can play with their kids. Like that aspect of it doesn't exist. And I don't actually fully understand why there isn't more of an effort, and maybe they've decided they just can't compete, or maybe they've all those execs and decision makers have seen their kids, play Subway Surfers on the phone and realize there's no way. It's like free to play games on the phones are already the thing that have, captured that audience. So I don't know. I mean, a thing that's interesting about Microsoft and Xbox is how they dip back into their back catalog. And I feel like they do not do it nearly as effectively as Sony and Nintendo. So Nintendo is famous, right, about maintaining its franchises.
Because Stephen, am I ever going to get my Gears collection?
Well, I mean, back catalog. They did a great job with the Master Chief collection once they finally fixed it. It took them a few years, right? But like, there's not a let's take a forgotten franchise from Xbox's past and bring it back. And
I see what you mean.
Unsuccessfully, right? There was was it Crimson
Skies?
Not Crimson Skies. Phantom Dust, right? There was the attempt to do Phantom Dust, but it didn't happen. There's Crimson Skies that kind of never really came back. There's what are I wonder for you guys, because you guys are big Xbox heads, right? Like, what to you would be the equivalent of Nintendo saying it's time to, dust off Donkey Kong or bring Donkey Kong back and make a new Donkey Kong game, which, there's been rumored that they're going to do that? Or what is the equivalent of Sony saying, we're going to go back into our back catalog and, I always feel like they could bring back SOCOM or something like that, and then people would be happy. Some time ago they brought back Warhawk as Starhawk. That's itself 10 years old or whatever. What would be the back catalog pull that you would like to see Xbox do that you then think there could be a good new one? And Perfect Dark seems to be the only one I'm aware of that they've announced where they're doing something like that, right? And it's not even kind of their own pull, because they're really hopefully pulling from more of the N64 vibes and the Xbox One vibes of Perfect Dark versus Perfect Dark Zero. But what would be the back catalog pull you would like to see Microsoft do?
We had this conversation almost yesterday, I think. The conversation yielded names like Crimson Skies and Fusion Frenzy. But beyond that, you had Rare Replay, you had the Master Chief Collection. Blinks was one of them, that's right. And then even Gears got its Ultimate Edition. I don't think the legacy of Xbox is nearly as established. People associate Metal Gear Solid with PlayStation, even though you can get that collection in a couple places now. I don't know that Xbox has anything that I should say, that they have not dipped into already.
Right.
I just don't think they do. Not for the purposes of pure nostalgia.
No. I would love. How about Geometry Wars, which I think was Activision owned, and they own Activision.
It's a great choice, but I don't know that it would have mass appeal. But it'd be a great choice.
Well, not mass appeal, but would that not that was the game to play for achievements when the 360 launched, right? That was
It's true.
They
It's
skipped
true.
they skipped a whole generation. Didn't really do anything with it. And it was Activision's franchise to handle. I don't know who has the rights to it now, but I feel like if they said we're bringing back Geometry Wars as a fixture for people playing the series consoles, like, you know, that I think that would be a fun throwback to sort of back in the day.
A good point. A good point. I do want to say there was a Banjo-Kazooie Game Boy Advance game,
Yes.
Grunty's Revenge. Credit to
There we
you,
go.
Stephen. There you go.
All right.
We are winding down, Stephen,
Yes.
but I do want you to have a moment to talk about GameFile, as it were. We got so in the weeds and talking about so many cool things.
Oh yeah.
GameFile, something I'm subscribed to. I think people need to check it out. I used to love the Axios news blast, but will you talk about your latest endeavor so we can plug that accordingly?
Certainly. And my kids are on the iPads and they're asking for extra time. So if you allow me 1 second to pause live and see if I can give them the more time. Okay, let's see. So my son wants. Okay, can I do this?
While you're tackling that, I will tell every listener, gamefile.news is where you can check out Stephen's website.
All right.
And it's well worth the time to do so, because you absolutely can check out the different media blasts. I still don't know how you find news on certain Mondays. Logan and I were toying that around. Like, and sometimes
last Monday was crazy. Yesterday was crazy. So there was nothing to, I think I've only seen a request for time from my son and not my daughter. No, that's still my son asking for time. Oh, this is going to be.
This is the work from home problem you were talking about. This is what it was.
I think I gave my son two extra editions of 15 minutes more time on his iPad, but I don't see a request from my daughter. This is going to get ugly. Okay, yeah. So I should promote this quickly because she's going to be in here asking what happened. Oh, wait. Oh, is this it? No. So sorry. That was probably not the most compelling bit of the podcast. Maybe it was. I mean,
it might have been.
So GameFile is meant to be, it's if you've found what I've been talking about in this conversation appealing, it's a mixture of original reporting about the industry and the culture of video games, as well as just a roundup of what's going on. I'm a very curious person about gaming, so I try to include as much, in any edition as I can. At Axios, I had a twice weekly newsletter, boiled down what was happening in gaming, topped it with original reporting on a regular basis. Now it's 3 times a week through GameFile. In the month of February, I will be putting up a paywall because I need to be able to feed those kids, and they can't live on iPad time alone. So I need to the effort here through reader supported endeavors like mine, like Aftermath, which is ex-Kotaku staffers, whether it's Second Wind, which is the folks from The Escapist, and other efforts like this, is to say, well, instead of having to be beholden to the decisions of some corporate, bosses somewhere, even the most well-meaning ones, and I had well-meaning ones at Axios, but they had other priorities of what they wanted to do with Axios' newsroom and its budget in 2024. Well, my priority is covering video games. I'm doing it for readers who care about that stuff and who want and value original reporting, who want to have who still want reporters to be part of the function of gaming existing as a thing, who want there to be people asking questions and trying to find information out. And so while I've had, wonderful full-time jobs and probably could have another full-time job if I pursued it covering games, I thought I have an opportunity to take this newsletter that tens of thousands of people loved reading and over email and say, I'm just bringing it over to, a different platform. I own it now. It's called GameFile. If you go to gamefile.news, you can read it there. You can sign up. You can get it emailed to you. 1 edition out of the 3 each week will be free in February. The other 2 will cost you, it's $10 a month or $100 a year. We're on sales at some point because I recognize there's subscription fatigue. In the past month, I found in an old interview I did on microcassette with Satoru Iwata when I interviewed him in 2004, and ran a good chunk of both the written and the audio of that interview, kind of a thing that, I hadn't even re-listened to in 20 years. I was excited to share that. I ran the news about Sea of Thieves to PlayStation. We'll see what y'all make of that in time. And just this past week ago, when Microsoft did its layoffs, I was able to once again go into the vaults and share some of what Phil Spencer and I discussed in January of 2022, right after the bid for Activision Blizzard was announced. I talked to him about it. I think I'm the only reporter to ask him about the potential for job cuts and how to think about that. And so I shared some of that in my coverage of the layoffs on Friday. So yes, I have some fun interviews lined up for the future already. I'll be covering DICE, GDC, the equivalent of E3, Summer Games Fest this year, all the games that are coming out, everything I can. Certainly appreciate the work that you guys do, by the way, and folks like yourselves who are zeroing in on a platform or delivering news in a way that I don't normally deliver it, information through podcast. I think is super valuable as well, and I'm just happy to be part of the whole scene, putting out news as much as I can. So yeah, so GameFile is a thing. You can get it, like I said, emailed. You can read it online. You can read it in the Substack's app if that's your thing. If you're an app person, and we'll see what comes of it, and hopefully I will get some good Xbox related coverage on there that the people will find super interesting. So yeah,
always look forward to it.
Very much so. Very much so. When it was Axios, I would forward it to Logan.
Yeah.
There you go. I can see that now, in not your forwarding, but I can see so much more data about what happens with my newsletter than I could at Axios. It was a company, so like I wasn't, thankfully, wasn't privy to or in charge of looking at that data. But I'm able to. I found once I'm stumbling through the interface, the back end for Substack, and because again, my site is I don't work for Substack. It's on there. I own it. I can take it wherever. But I'm going through the Substack's backend, and I was able to see that like one of my early newsletters was shared 60 times from one recipient. So I'm like, oh, they must have blasted it out to their company, and then they must have had this system must have been able to detect that 60 people opened it via that forward or something like that, which is very interesting because I always kind of wondered. I'm like, okay, I know how many people have been sent my newsletter at Axios because I would know the overall subscriber number. But I never knew like, okay, what does that actually translate to? It's like when people talk about TV ratings and how many people actually watch the show, because not everybody's watching the same show for the full hour it's on or whatever it is. Right. So it's like people tune in, they tune out or whatever. So I could see some of that. I'm trying to avoid looking at too much of the data because ultimately it's just the good reporting will hopefully get a good audience, and we'll see. I don't really have the bandwidth to try to jury rig it or go after those of you who are forwarding and say you need to be paying as well. How dare you?
Well, I will tell you as a smaller creator who does try to do those interviews, I hope that people source you properly and you get to enjoy the result of your work. And we appreciate the work that you do. It is too few and far between that we get to see the best reporting. So thank you.
That's very kind. And yeah, I appreciate the hustle that you guys both have. Whether it was the Cliff Bleszinski interview recently, I know it was a little bit frustrating to see some of that make the rounds elsewhere, but you're doing the good work. You're getting those people, and people who have that experience and go on your show know you're for real, and then they know you're worth talking to again, right? And so the best things you may get out of the people you're interviewing, as you know, or sometimes not the first interview, it's that second, it's that third conversation or whatever, and you guys are doing a bang up job. So I was, happy to be able to be part of it.
Really, really appreciate that. Check out gamefile.news wherever you guys can. Have a fantastic rest of your week, everyone. Take care.